Well, greetings, my beloved clients and friends. So, getting close to Christmas, and in our last video, so I just want to wish everybody happy holidays. For those of you that can't make the Christmas party tonight, we'll miss you, we'll be thinking about you. Anyway, so in the last video, we talked about kind of the uncertain near-term outlook, because you can make a kind of compelling case why the market could come down, and you can make almost an equally compelling case why the market could go up. And so it's kind of a challenging situation where the conviction is not really strong either way. And one of the things we mentioned in that video was that one of the concerns maybe was the threat from China, economically and politically and everything. And the question was, is the US in decline, and is China on the rise and perhaps on the way to becoming the next world superpower? And so I wanted to leave that for another video. And I think those are two topics that we'll discuss separately. One is the US in decline and is China on the rise? Okay, so one, is the US in decline? Two, is China on the rise? So I'll leave the US in decline question for another video. And in this video, I want to talk about China. And I've been trying to schedule a trip over there because I want to have boots on the ground and see it with my own eyes. And so I got my passport. I'm getting the process of getting my visa. I was trying to go before the end of the year, but it'll probably be after the first of the year. But these are my initial thoughts. So you could kind of frame the question like this: is China on the rise, or is it going to be the next Japan? Because in the 80s, Japan was really even in the 70s and 80s, Japan was really on the rise. They really recovered from the devastation of World War II, and they started buying up a lot of real estate. They were better. I mean, they were outperforming our auto industry, which had been the global standard. You know, we had the big three: Ford, GM, and Chrysler at the time, and then here comes Japan, and you know, they had superior manufacturing capabilities, and not just capabilities, but their execution and quality. And you know, they were held up. There was this guy, American, named Edward Deming, that would go over there and say, man, they're way better than us at the manufacturing. And a lot of companies were starting to try to mimic some of the Japanese practices in business, and people were concerned because they were buying up a lot of US commercial real estate, golf courses, and you would see them, and they were visiting here, and they were just extremely affluent, and it was, and their stock market was soaring, and there was that kind of almost fear in the 80s. And then it didn't materialize. They had debt issues, and then for the last 30 or so years, they've kind of been flat. And I hear if you go there, I mean, it's a beautiful, clean country. It seems very prosperous, but the growth has stopped. It's just kind of flatlined, and population's in decline, and so like they're not considered like, oh man, they're a rising superpower and they could be threatened. They're not thought of that way anymore. China, on the other hand, in the 70s and 80s, they started their rise, and they started taking over manufacturing, and America was only glad enough to send manufacturing over there because it was cheaper. And like Walmart in particular, they would grind down their suppliers, the merchants that wanted to do business in them, and they had, I mean, that was the place to be, right? If you could put your product in Walmart, you were good. But the tales were told that you would go to Bentonville, Arkansas, and they would say, you got to come in with a lower price. And I mean, the manufacturers would, well, that's as low as we could go. They'd be like, well, then you're going to have to manufacture in China. And then Bush wanted to finish his dad's war, and he did an agreement in early 2000 that kind of really opened up the doors for even further for Chinese manufacturing. And they've just been on this incredible meteoric rise and become there's an affluent class there that, you know, the luxury manufacturers like Tiffany, Cartier, all those high-end brands, they want to be in China and Hong Kong and Taiwan. And I mean, they have, you know, Shanghai, I think they have more stores in, like some of these real luxury brands, they have more stores in Shanghai than in New York. And because the affluent Chinese consumer is is a better market than the American affluent consumer, you know, and so they're just doing certain things. Like they've built in China, there are 12 cities bigger than New York City, and these are not cities. I mean, New York started 400 years ago in the 1600s, you know, and becoming a economic hub, and these Chinese ones have popped up in the last few decades. From nothing, they've built New Yorks, 12 of them, bigger than New York, and probably 15 to 20 of them around the size of New York, you know. So I mean, out of nowhere, these massive airports, their rail system, and just everything's made there, you know, and so, and I mean, their numbers, over 1 billion people, right, compared to, you know, 300 million in the U.S. Should we be worried, right? And then one of their, you could consider it an advantage on some levels, is that they're a control economy, which means, I mean, they don't have to vote for stuff. They have one guy in charge that makes the decisions, and when he decides to do something, they could just move forward. There's not a, you know, in a certain degree, our politics are ruled by committee, you know, and, you know, that never works well in business. So they're almost like a corporation with a CEO that is leading this corporation, so they can move quickly and decisively and make decisions without asking the people's opinion like we do in America. And so in some cases that's an advantage until it's not. And so it's an advantage if the one guy running it is perfect, right? Or very, very, very good, but it's all dependent on that one guy making the right decision, right? And that's the big difference in America, that we don't, I mean, we have a president and he has a lot of influence, but not as much as maybe we could give him credit for. America has risen over the last 200 plus years with, you know, 46 different presidents, Democrats and Republicans, good ones and bad ones. And through all that, you know, they keep moving forward, you know? And I think the reason is that fundamentally the structure that America was built, anyone could reach for the brass ring. And out of 300 million people, you're gonna have some that do get it, you know? So we have 500 companies that we call the S&P 500, and they're run by 500 different guys, and these 500 guys have each risen to the top in their field, and there's a competition. If they're not the one to be the top guy, there's competition for someone who thinks they could do it better. And that competition, like the competition between Coke and Pepsi, makes Coke and Pepsi both better, and gives the consumer the best option, because they're always competing, and that's not the case in China. So that's the advantage and disadvantage of a controlled economy. And I think in the end, our system is better. Maybe in the near term we can't move as quickly, but long term we have the opportunity for more great leaders to rise up, and potential leaders to want to come here because they have the opportunity to rise up. Whereas in China, that's really not the case. I guess there are some immigrants wanting to go to China, but not to the extent that America is the destination of choice for that aspiring entrepreneur. Like the song that Frank Sinatra said, that spirit of that song, New York, New York. It goes, I want to wake up in the city that never sleeps. I want to take my chance. If I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. And I know it's probably the hardest place to make it, but if I can make it here, I can make it really big. And that spirit is an American spirit, and not in China. So I think that the leader of China, Xi Jinping, he had been making a lot of good decisions and putting them on the right path. And then COVID came, and they had this like really strict zero COVID policy, and they shut down. I was talking about those New York-sized cities and bigger, and they were shut down completely, and for long periods of time, long after the rest of the world was kind of saying, okay, we're past this COVID thing, they were still really strict on it, and it really, really set them back. And if I did like a picture of 3 countries' response to COVID, and you say China, America, and Mexico, and China had the most extreme response. America's was pretty extreme too, but not as extreme as China's. And Mexico's was actually pretty lax. They were kind of letting people die. And man, less people got COVID in Mexico, but more of them died, as a percentage. But they didn't like shut down the economy to the extent that America did, and much less to the extent that China did. And they didn't start throwing cash to the extent that America did, $10 billion, trillion, that they just started paying out and created this incredible inflation, right? And so because they didn't have a big response, they came out of it kind of unscathed. They weren't $10 trillion in debt. They hadn't shut down the economy. And so, man, after COVID, the Mexican pesos are crushing the US dollar, and fear of China sent a lot of manufacturing over to Mexico, because it was you don't have that China threat. You didn't have the COVID risk, and you didn't have the controlled economy risk and the communism risk, and it's closer. You didn't have to cross through the Suez Canal, and so they kind of emerged pretty strong from it, right? Whereas America was kind of weakened by it because of their strong response, and China was even more weakened by it. So, coming out of COVID, China's economy is struggling a little bit. They have a real estate problem like the one we had in America in 2007 and 8, and many people say it's many times worse. Super high leverage, and is the government, and the government's not as willing to step in and be the backstop like America was. To a degree they are, but maybe not enough, and so the real estate situation isn't that good in China. The economy is slowing down. They're still struggling in the wake of their overly aggressive response to the coronavirus, and they have a population problem. Yeah, there's over 1 billion of them, but they just became not the largest country by population. India just surpassed them. They had this policy for like over 30 years, this one-child policy that they kept for too long, and then they belatedly moved it up to a 2-child policy, then a 3-child policy. But they're running out of people, and they don't have that huge immigration demand that we have. And so there's some estimates that their population will be down from 1 billion to maybe 600 million by the end of the century. So that's not a good picture. Doesn't bode well for them long term. So, and when you all put your hopes on one guy to make all the right decisions, that doesn't bode well either. So, to be quite frank with you, I'm not too concerned about the threat externally from China. And other people even talk about, well, they're what's the word I want to use? They're teaming up, if you will. That's not the exact word I want to use, but they're this thing called BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa was added, and other countries are wanting to be added to it, and are being added, and there's rumble about the rise of the BRICS. And man, it's been around for 20 years and they've accomplished absolutely nothing. Okay, and if you really step back and think about it, put a Brazilian, a Russian, an Indian, and a Chinese and a South African in a room and just take a step back and look. Man, they have absolutely nothing in common. It's not like the Eurozone where they're all concentrated in one place and they have a certain common background and certain common religion and certain common history. I mean, these five have nothing in common. Not the same language, not the same ethnicities, not the same races. I mean, not the same religion. Brazil's Catholic. Russia, having been communist for a long time, is really atheist. India there's multiple religions there, but I mean, the big one is Hindu, and China, same thing, is largely Buddhist. I mean, it's kind of like it sets itself up for a joke, and which one of them is going to say, okay, we're all going to agree for you to take the lead, right? And if you think about it, man, they're each on different continents. They have so many competing interests that to think that they're going to form a league and overcome the U.S., I just don't see it. So that's my thoughts on the risk from China. Yeah, they've had a tremendous rise, but I think it's more the Japan scenario. Japan hasn't fallen off the map, but their trajectory has leveled off, and they're really no longer a threat to be the global superpower. And I think China, that's my best guess. So I still want to go see. I could be wrong, but that's my thoughts on China. There are some winners, and we're considering adding one company in particular to our portfolio that's a Chinese company. And maybe we'll talk about that more later. But so in the next video, I'll talk more about the question of the decline of the U.S. All right, so hope you guys have I said wonderful holidays. If you hear a little bell ringing in the background, that's my puppy Pumpkin. Let me see if I can. That's her right there. So if that bell is too annoying, just leave something in the comments and I'll take it off her collar. All right? But that way I could hear if she's close by or far away. You guys have a wonderful holidays and we'll be in touch.